and then I'd like to open this up for a conversation. And I'll start by saying it's not every day that you publish 2 books within 6 months. You have to be a little nuts to do that, but one of them is about ACE, and so there are reasons to talk about them. So I'd like to start by asking all of you, how does the climate crisis make you feel? Does it make you get up in the morning feeling excited and energized about creating a cleaner, healthier, more socially connected, more just society? Or do you feel kind of dispirited and defeated by the overwhelming scale and scope of this challenge and the fact that we have dragged our feet for so long? If you're in the latter camp, you're not alone. Surveys show that about half of the American public thinks that we could solve the global warming crisis, and only about 6% of us think that we will. And and there is a good reason for this. There are reasons that I write about that are rooted in the basic neuropsychology of the human brain that sort of convince us to believe what we have believed for a long time. But there's even something more pernicious that I put my finger on. Now, I've been involved in the communication side of this for a couple of decades, and I consistently hear experts talk about climate change in this way. And this comes primarily from scientists who we've been learning about this from. And the basic approach that you so often hear is that climate change is an entangled thicket, like a Gordian knot of interacting huge global systems. So you have the atmosphere, the oceans, the cryosphere, which is all the ice in the world, the biosphere, the lithosphere, which is minerals, rocks, the land. And our climate is composed by the interactions of all of these things, right? And scientists are in the business of studying and understanding big global systems. Climate scientists are. And so it makes sense that they would describe it this way. The unfortunate consequence of that is that when experts talk about how we can solve the climate crisis, they talk about needing to make sweeping changes in equally big and complex human systems. So urban design and buildings and urban infrastructure, food production and food transportation, transportation systems that span the globe and serve your hometown, waste management systems, forestry systems, international finance, the stock markets, all international governance, domestic governance, local governance. And all of these are like an intertwined Gordian knot as well. And the result of that, there are a couple of results from this. One is that it creates this belief that we have to create a master plan to solve this problem. That somebody has to create one. And that's actually not the case. That's not something that anybody is really capable of doing, and everybody will admit it. The other thing that happens is that it makes us feel very small in the face of something very big, and it makes us feel like the actions that we can undertake and that our organizations and communities can undertake are just a drop in the bucket. Now we've been pushed to think this way, in particular by campaigns by the fossil fuel industry. They've wanted us to focus on individual action rather than collective action, because as long as we focus on individual action, we aren't going to go after their profits. Um, so this kind of explains why we're constantly in this situation where every documentary, every exhibit, most articles that are written about the climate crisis describe how big the problem is, how far advanced we are into it, all of the negative consequences that will befall us if we don't do anything about it. And then they say at the end, please, we just have to find the will to do something about this. Now, I've just described what scientists call a wicked problem. And a wicked problem is a problem that you cannot solve because you can't define it. You can't get all the information you need. Even if you solve a piece of it that you can see, you cause unintended problems that you can't see. And so the best you can do is work very hard to manage it as best you can and expect to take your lumps along the way anyway. And I can't think of a more dispiriting, disempowering narrative to give to people. And and I have never felt um, uh, that this is a problem we can't and shouldn't solve. And so I've asked social scientists, why don't I feel this way when we describe the rest of the public as feeling this way? And they give me answers that don't really suffice, that don't really satisfy. So I've been thinking about it a lot, and it finally occurred to me that when I was an art student in college, one of my professors came up to me when I was working on a painting, and it was one of those incredibly frustrating days. You know, I was trying to make this painting and it wasn't working, and everything I tried to do to fix it didn't work. And he came up to me and kind of the height of my frustration. He says, "Here, what you do: hang it upside down and go home, because when you come back tomorrow, you will have disrupted your assumptions, and you'll see it for what it is." Right? And that will unlock solutions. And I can tell you, I owned a design company for 25 years. Hanging something literally upside down on the wall and going home is an invaluable trick to solve problems. But there's a generalization that I made that from that, because this applies to any kind of problem. And here's what the crux of it is. If you're trying to solve a problem and nothing you try seems to work, ask yourself if you're making an assumption that's the same in every solution you try. Is there a premise? Is there a presumed requirement? Is there an assumption about the problem that is common in every solution that fails? And if you can find it, and the more fundamental it is, try setting it aside and see what you discover. And so I applied that to the climate crisis. What if we turn the climate crisis upside down? What if that assumption is that we're talking about an entangled Gordian knot of interacting global systems that are bigger than we are, and they're too complex to disentangle? So if I want to work on agriculture practices, for example, I start pulling on it, and I inevitably pull on energy generation and water transportation and food transportation and supply chains, and it gets too big, right? What what we discover when we hang the climate crisis upside down is that there's really only one thing we have to do. And that one thing is stop burning fossil fuels. And we want to do that quickly because the consequences are so horrific if we don't. Um, and we don't want to fail because we don't want to face those consequences. So this leads to an imperative, or almost a mantra, that I write about in the book. And it goes like this: stop burning fossil fuels well before mid-century, and absolutely, positively, do not fail. Now, what happens when we accept this as our new premise? Well, the first thing that happens is we recognize that all of the decisions we make are amenable to this challenge, right? So the decisions we make in our households, in our places of business, whoever our employers are, in our community governance, in our local town, in our state government, in our national government, in our consumer decisions, all of these things are amenable to this challenge. How do I do the things I do? How do we do the things we do without burning fossil fuels? Um, and so it's not as if we have to disentangle this whole thing. The difference is that we can make not burning fossil fuels a co-top priority with the top priorities we use when we're making our decisions anyway, right? We don't necessarily, most of us don't have to take this on as a new challenge. It's just the way we just apply this challenge to the things we're doing anyway. And I did this in my own business. When I owned Bowman Design Group, we were a $3 million company. We had 12 employees. We occupied a 2,000 square foot house, standalone house in a commercial neighborhood. And I decided I wanted to try to decarbonize our operations. So I joined the climate registry to have a third party validate what our emissions were every year. And then I had read that the companies that make the most rapid progress on their environmental goals do it by setting what are called stretch goals, goals that seem impossible. And if it sounds impossible, it's a good goal. If it has a definite date, it's a good goal. And then you have to back that up with a commitment not to fail. Failure is not an option. which is what this statement is. Stop burning fossil fuels well before mid-century. There's the date, and absolutely do not fail is our charge, that failure is not an option, right? So I didn't know how to go about it. I set really dramatic goals for us. In fact, my office manager, when she read the what we were going to try to do, said, "Are you nuts?" She literally asked, and I thought, "Oh, okay, we're on the right track here." And I did what you would do. This was back in 2007, and I called a solar installer, and they came out and said, "Well, we have to build you a carport because your roof faces the wrong way. It's going to cost you $90,000." I thought, good Lord, that's out of the question. So I called an architect I knew and I said, I can't afford solar. What do I do? And he said, well, your building heats up in the sun. You're in Southern California. So put 4 inches of rigid foam on your roof and then a highly reflected metal roof on top of that. And your building won't get so hot. You won't have to run air conditioning so much. I got a quote on it. It was $40,000. I was spending $3,500 a year on electricity and gasoline and stuff. It made no sense. So I thought I was dead in the water, and all I could think of to do was the strategy I just described. We actually came up with a slogan, which was "Make every decision a green decision." And so we made it. Just occurred to me that we make decisions every single day in the course of business. Why don't we make energy efficiency our top priority along with our business priority whenever we make a decision? And it caused us to rethink everything that we had taken for granted for years, some of which makes me feel really stupid. And I'll tell you the one that makes me feel stupid, because I think it's a really revealing story. We had, our employees commuted to work through the Los Angeles Basin and Orange County, and we're located just right next to Long Beach. And two of them had moved all the way to Palm Springs, and they were commuting together 100 miles through rush hour traffic every single day to get to work, and then they were commuting all the way home in the evenings. So their evenings and their night times must have been horrendously short, right? All to come to work every day faithfully. They liked working there. This was a good job, but my goodness, and we took it for granted. And then we would, since we were a design firm, not a production company, we would go visit our suppliers who built exhibits for us. And the main one was about 60 miles away. So people commute to work. And then when you need to have a meeting, you drive 60 miles, have the meeting, you drive 60 miles back. By this time, you're exhausted and your productivity for the day is shot, right? And then you drive all the way home in commuter traffic. And now your deadlines have piled up on you. And day after day, you find yourself working overtime, you find yourself more tired. And we just assumed for years that this was the byproduct of doing business. It was the way everybody did business. We didn't like it, but it was just the fact of life. We made good humor about it. And then when I set this goal, I said, wait a minute, there's an awful lot of carbon pollution accompanying this business operation. So I told the two guys who commuted from Palm Springs, you're only allowed in here 1 day a week unless there's an emergency, and maybe even not once a week if you don't need to come. And we're going to reassign all shop visits so that they occur on the way to work and on the way home. So it's just schedule your meetings for the beginning of the day and the end of the day, unless it's an absolute emergency, so that you don't drive all this time. Well, what I noticed, the results shocked me in several different ways. First of all, I got our emissions report back, and it turned out that by doing sort of boringly simple things, we had reduced our emissions by 2/3 in 15 months. And nobody's lifestyle changed for the worse. All we did was eliminate the waste that we didn't see and that we paid for all the time. The second thing is that everybody started laughing more and being happier and being more productive and enjoying their work more because they weren't so tired and stressed, right? So because of this kind of extraordinary result, we received a statewide award, Small Business of the Year award, from the California Air Resources Board. And we published a press release about it, which most small businesses don't do, but I just thought, what the heck? Two things happened that I did not see coming. The first was I got a phone call the next day from our most important client, a Fortune 1000 company, called to say, I just wanted to call to say how proud we are to work with a supplier who would voluntarily do what you guys have done. I thought, you know what this means? This means that there is a really deep wellspring of goodwill waiting for anybody who will break the ice on this issue. The next thing that happened is that I walked into work, and every design firm has a resource library. And the resource library is bookcases filled with catalogs of hardware and carpet and paint samples and unusual technologies that we might use and specify in our exhibits. And it's binders and boxes and catalogs, and it was all spread out all over the floor. When I walked into the office, I said, what's going on? And our studio manager said, oh, well, we got together and we decided that we want to put all the sustainable materials right at eye level where we're going to see them, and we want to shove everything else out of sight to the edges, so we'll only touch it if we're stuck. I didn't ask for this, right? And it was a sign, one of many signs, that this meant that people who already liked their jobs were finding a new sense of meaning in their work. And we all crave this. Everybody craves this. In fact, 2 years later, the California Air Resources Board was going to issue another round of awards, and they asked me to come give a keynote talk to the new awardees at their ceremony. And so I decided I'm not going to talk in business language. I'm going to talk about my genuine personal motivations for taking this on, and my frustrations, and what I learned, and the kind of rewards that I discovered, that made my company a more fertile and humane and tightly knit family of people, rather than a cooler kind of casual business environment. So I told that story. When I got done, one of the awardees said, "Can I say a few words?" So I handed the microphone to her. She told a personal story about her motivations and what she considered to be the rewards of what she did. She got done, and the next person picked up the microphone, and he told a very personal story about his motivations. And the microphone found its way all around the room, person to person to person. Finally, it came to a guy who stood up and he said, I just can't tell you how amazing it is for me to be in a business meeting where for the first time I can talk about the things I actually care about. Now think about that for a second. Here we have this deep wellspring of desire to solve this crisis that we know is so dangerous, and to solve our racial imbalance, injustice, inequity crisis that we know is so destructive. And we feel a strong desire to have deeper connections with one another in our working lives, in our daily lives. And all we have to do is break the ice, right? If we break the ice on the climate issue, and I can tell you, back in 2007, 2008, if I was at a party and somebody said, what do you do? And I say, I work on communication about the climate crisis, everyone walks away, right? It was the best way I knew to end a conversation. And this has changed a great deal since then. Public concern is now at an all-time high. And so I wrote this book, What If Solving the Climate Crisis is Simple, as a way to say two things. Number one, this sense of disempowerment that most people feel is only because of the way we've been taught to interpret the problem. And I know from the literature in mountaineering that I read, I'm a mountaineer and so forth. And so I can't help but read the literature about accidents and disasters and the psychology of people who survive them. Um, when you're really up against it, you need to acknowledge the situation you're really in and find the beauty in your circumstances, and then do the things that carry you through to the next opportunity to do the next thing that carries you through. And this is how societies actually change. This is how we don't need a master plan. Nobody can create a master plan for the climate crisis. We need to do the things that we can do today that will create new opportunities tomorrow. And we need to break the ice so that a lot more of us are empowered to do this. So this book series was all fashioned around the idea that COVID and the economic crisis gives us an opportunity to rebuild differently as we come out of these crises. And the fact is, the silver lining of all this grief and tragedy and horror is that we're discovering how quickly societies can change. You know, it was only took about a week for the world to suddenly stay home, and for governments to move trillions of dollars to find relief, and for all of us to learn to use Zoom, right, and Google Meets and Teams and all the other online platforms. Last summer, surveys found that 60 some percent of the people who were fortunate enough to work at home didn't want to go back, right? They didn't want to put on their corporate costume and sit in traffic to go to work and be in a corporate facility. This means that our expectations are dramatically changing. You know, we saw the air get clear, we saw the streets get quiet, and it was in the context of fear, but it demonstrates that the way we see the world is flexible, it's fungible, and this creates opportunities. But it also demonstrates that there, as you all know, there are very deep inequities in our society. You know, at the same time we were watching the murders of Black citizens by police, and we were beginning to see very clearly the inequities in who has to go to work in the workplace. And it's usually people of color who are poorly paid, and that people in more white collar professions can work from home. And that's a huge differential in risk, right? And that aligns with the differential impacts of climate and air pollution that so disproportionately affect communities of color and low income communities. So at the same time, now we're going to shift to another book. This one is titled, it's a part of the same series, the Resetting Our Future series, and the title is Empowering Climate Action in the United States. And it's co-edited and written by Deb Morrison and me. Deb and I were among a group of about a dozen very diverse people who were coordinating an effort called the Action for Climate Empowerment Strategic Planning Framework. It's a mouthful. The shorthand for it is for Action for Climate Empowerment is ACE. So we'll say ACE. And here's the idea behind ACE. The Paris Agreement and the underlying treaty, the UNFCCC, have a provision called ACE, Action for Climate Empowerment. And the idea is to urge signatory countries to create national strategies to empower their public to help to participate in finding and implementing solutions to the climate crisis in just and equitable ways. They focus a lot on the sustainable development goals from the UN. They focus a lot on gender equity, but in our context, in the context of the United States, racial inequity and economic inequity are deeply rooted, profound challenges that we need to solve. And so Trump was president last year, and in about April, I was recruited to lead the writing team for this framework. And the idea was that we couldn't create a national strategy. Just imagine for a moment the concept of creating a national strategy that brings educators, scientists, social marketers, communication strategists, businesses, health workers, the media, the arts, all of these different domains, activists, youth movements, indigenous leaders, climate justice movements, all together, and aligns all of the work that they are doing nationally, at state level, and in local communities all across this country, and bring the philanthropic community in and align their decisions about spending with guidance from the work that's happening on the ground, right? If we could do that, and we could do that with the imprimatur of the federal government and the convening power of the White House, which is enormous. If you have the convening power of the White House and you call anybody, they will come to a meeting, right? But we didn't have that, and we knew that there was potential for a new presidential administration in 2021. Fortunately, that worked out. And we also knew that the next international climate meeting, a COP, would take place in November of 2021. And so our thought process was, what if we gather a very diverse community of ACE leaders from across the country? They don't have to have high positions, but they have to be influential, and they have to have deep experience. And they can be in every age, every color, every circumstance, bring them together and do the work, lay the foundation for creating a national strategy. And that we called it building a framework for a national strategy. So as I was writing, I wrote that other book in July of last year, and it was published in October. While that book was in production, we held dialogues, online dialogue sessions with about 120 participants who reflected this diversity of the community. And the genius of this strategy that the team came up with was that we didn't let anybody stay in their sector. So it wasn't educators just talking to educators and business people just talking to business people and youth activists just talking to youth activists. The idea was to break the silos down, and everybody leaves their logo at the door. They leave their job description at the door and their title, and we all convene as equals, and we co-create a vision for where this work should be in 20 years, and then co-create recommendations, specific recommendations for the actions that need to happen in 10 years to get there, and in 5 years to get there, and in 2 years to get there. And all of this work was compiled by rapporteurs who took notes, and we had recordings that were used only for internal, note-taking purposes. And Deb and I wrote this into the framework document, which then went through 3 rounds of review with the coordinating team, with all the participants in the dialogue, and with about 20 selected experts in different domains, strategic reviewers. So the people who do the 6 Americas public surveys at George Mason and Yale universities, and people, Megan Bang, who's in the indigenous rights leadership movement, and leaders from the Sunrise movement, youth movement, and educators and others. And we took all of their feedback and revised the document to ensure that it spoke with the voices of the people who created its insight and its knowledge. And the experience was utterly transformational for the people who were involved, for a couple of reasons. One is when you are in dialogue with people who you never ever are in meetings with, because you work in different silos. Geographically, you're separated, your professional life is separated. You discover the depth of knowledge and wisdom and experience that exists all over the place at the most local levels. And you begin to realize that I don't own the climate issue. My profession doesn't own the climate issue. The idea that you're the white savior who comes into this issue and comes up with a plan that unlocks the lock for everyone goes out the window, and you suddenly discover a rich community of people who know how to get this work done right where they are, and all they need is support, and they know exactly what kinds of support they need. For example, I'll just give you a couple. Suppose the federal government in its contracting work required that every contract include investment in green jobs training, in climate training along the way. What if internships were distributed more equitably so that internships tend to go to people who don't have a problem affording food and housing, right? Or travel to where the internship is. Well, that means that they favor well-off, usually Caucasian people. How do we change the funding for internships so that they are available and there's funding for transportation and childcare and rent and food, right, to support a more equitable distribution of those. And lots and lots of other things. Treat the internet in rural areas like utilities so that there is real access that allows people to participate in decision making about a community's future, because the real wisdom is in the communities. People in your community know much more about what your community needs to deal with climate change than people in Washington or California or Michigan would ever know, right? So we wrote that framework. It was completed on November 30th after multiple rounds of review. This was an around-the-clock challenge. And in the course of that, the publisher of the book series asked Deb and me if we would turn it into a book as well. You can download the framework at aceframework.us. It's available for free, and we've collected over 400 signatory individuals and organizations. We would dearly love it if you guys become a signatory, because that helps. I think you have, yeah. That helps us with the effort to get this in front of the White House. But so would a book. And so we agreed that what we would do is write several chapters around that. We would include the framework in the book, the framework that's available for free, but we would provide additional context with a couple of short chapters, and we would recommend where this needs to go in order to be fleshed out and finished. And then we invited commentaries, short commentaries by a diverse group of climate action leaders. And they include 3 educators, the sustainability manager for the city of Orlando, the communication strategist who put the health climate consortium together and was a strategist for the ultra successful Truth campaign that helped keep teens from taking up smoking in Florida. Ed Maybeck at George Mason University, who leads the Global Warming 6 Americas and Climate Change in the American Mind series. Bill McKibben, the famous 350.org activist. Sherry Mitchell, who is a leading indigenous rights lawyer and activist. Taylor Morton from the Sunrise Movement, and Andrew Winston, who is a best-selling author and advisor to corporate leadership about sustainability and climate action. So you can see this is really broad-based, right? And the exciting thing about this work right now is that we're starting to see it being implemented already. People are owning this. They're sharing it with their networks. The researchers are starting to create a plan to solve the evaluation challenge that this work requires. And we're starting to see indigenous groups start to develop these kinds of dialogues in their communities. There's a movement in Atlanta to create some dialogues before Earth Day that build on this framework and contribute to it. So where this stands today is that the Biden-Harris administration, within a week, not only rejoined the Paris Agreement, but took an all-of-government approach to executive orders to advance climate and justice and green jobs creation. They understood the nexus of those 3 things are inseparable. And those 3 things are at the heart of this framework. The framework actually says that unjust decision-making processes can only lead to unjust outcomes. So this is process in addition to specific recommendations. We're in the process now on the inside of government agencies and on the outside of government of getting this in front of the leadership in the Biden administration. And I have to say, it's chaotic there from what I hear. I'm not so connected to the day-to-day part of that work. But those who are say that everybody's still trying to get their feet on the ground. The Biden administration was denied a real transition. And so they're sort of doing the transition while they get up and running. And the people in the federal agencies, EPA and NOAA and the other agencies are all kind of in a position of saying, we don't really know where we are right now, but they are advancing the ACE project in their efforts to find their footing with the White House. So we're very hopeful that this will happen. And if it does happen, there's a second challenge to it. One is to turn this framework into a strategic action plan for the nation to do the alignment that I talked about earlier. The other is that this has to have a life of its own outside of government, because it needs to endure beyond any particular administration, and it needs to be owned by the ACE leaders in so many different domains and communities across this country that it becomes part of our culture. So if this interests you, I implore you, and I don't do this to sell books, authors don't make money on books, but I urge you to buy this book on Amazon or wherever you like, either as an ebook. It's only $5 as an ebook. It's $11 as a paperback, and it's thin. Buy a bunch of them and distribute them to your political representatives, your leaders, because the content in it is transformational. Distribute it to your employers, to your networks of people who are interested in climate action. Um, because I have to say, it is truly an inspiring experience, not only to read it, but to join and participate. Because as we carry this forward, we're now on the hook. Those of us who are doing this work are doing it essentially pro bono. And we're on the hook not to let anybody down now, right? Because the community wants this. Everybody sees the value of it, and we have created we've got a tiger by the tail now. Um, so I'll stop here, and I think it would be great to have a discussion and hear your questions and thoughts, and we can talk together about where we go in the future.
Yeah, I'd like to, if you could talk a little bit about some of what's in the framework, especially the focus, and again, on education, on how we talk to people and how we talk
Mhm.
about climate, and the importance of education. I mean, the Paris Agreement, and before that, all of the agreements have had these Article 6 and 13, or is it 12? And
Article.
it is about supporting vast mass communication on climate, as we do from the
Yeah.
top down, from federal and within communities, like we talk
Right.
about anything like the environment or something like that. So
Yeah.
can you just
No,
briefly
that's a great.
mention that?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. So ACE is not an education program. It's a learning and action program, and it's intended to be utterly broad-based, to break down our assumption that when we do education about climate change, we're talking about K through 12, or
Mhm.
we're talking about explaining the carbon cycle to everyone in America and
Yeah.
things like that. So there is a call within ACE to leverage the institutions in our society. That means cultural institutions, museums, nature centers, learning centers, uh, uh, um, civic centers of various kinds. It means to definitely leverage the education community in all of its dimensions, to leverage workforce training and career development. And that starts in some places in 10th grade or younger, and tracks people toward technical careers or trades, and to educate those people, but also on in-service education for professionals and for political and policy leaders
Mhm.
about racial equity and racial justice and the processes that lead to participatory democracy, essentially. It involves public access to information, is the way the UN describes it, and that means making um, all government science data and policy data available to anybody who wants it freely and easily. It also encourages the sharing of information among communities and networks and businesses and other organizations that have learned something useful, and it suggests the creation of backbone infrastructure that encourages the kind of collaboration that says a project that works in Tucson might work in, I don't know, someplace in Alabama, and let's build the connections between people and communities that allow the sharing of information and the uptake of things, strategies that work all across the country. It encourages international cooperation so that we're learning from other countries and they're learning from our methodologies, because we have to recognize that not all national circumstances are alike. And so our national circumstances is that our society is highly diverse ideologically and racially and economically and geographically. And so the solutions that are going to work in urban Detroit or Atlanta are very different from rural Central California or the Phoenix or Tucson or indigenous communities in lots of places around the country. So so you have to speak language that speaks to the people there, right? And that means you have to encourage people to speak for themselves, and we have to one of the mayor of San Luis Obispo, California, which has very ambitious climate plans, um, said in the dialogues that municipal government is geared toward making plans quickly and implementing them. And what we're doing in this ACE process is we're taking the time for genuine dialogue so that we learn to listen to one another and to build trust among people that we're all trying to make our community better. And if we hear one another, ultimately, we can find wiser options rather than one party imposing its agenda on another by winning a campaign. And so that means that cities need to share, they're learning about how to do this. There was a report in Phoenix about the need for shade, that in heat waves, there are neighborhoods that are becoming genuinely unhealthy to walk through.
We have that here, definitely.
Yeah, and they're mostly low-income communities and communities of neighborhoods of color. And so the city agreed that they would ask the local residents in those neighborhoods where to install shade, so that the master plan wouldn't come in and just decide arbitrarily, but they'd find out from people what would work for them, and that's what they did. And that is another example of sharing, of knowledge. It shows how valuable local knowledge is, but it also shows that if you make this knowledge available through sharing mechanisms, that other cities can learn from it, and so forth. So this is what ACE is actually about. It requires more sustained investment. It requires more evidence-based decision making about giving grants. At the national level, you can get grants from time to time from the National Science Foundation or ACE or NOAA or NASA to do a pilot project. So you do a pilot project and it works. And then you want to take it to scale, and there's no funding for that, right? And there's no funding for the infrastructure that keeps successful organizations in this game or individuals in this game. I can tell you just personal experience. I've worked on climate communication projects for the National Academy of Sciences and NOAA and the Birch Aquarium at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. Won an ad campaign we did about climate change, won a White House Champions of Change award in the Obama administration. And they're normally in business, if you do something well, it leads to new opportunities in the field. Not true with climate communication because there's no sustained funding for any of this kind of work. So ACE would redirect funding, not necessarily for a national advertising campaign, but for training in the kind of communication that happens right where people live. And all that remains to be worked out. I mean, this is the work of taking this framework and moving it from framework to genuine action plan for the federal government.
And you feel good about the future of that.
I feel hopeful about the future of that for a couple of reasons. One is that there are agencies within the government that are putting ACE forward with a budget request, and if that
Okay.
happens, the purpose is to engage with all of us and the community that we helped coordinate to co-create the next step of this, as a literal action plan to engage the public in climate action and climate justice action. Also, those of us who were involved in this project won't let it go. Uh, it's uh, and people from outside of this community are calling on us and saying, there are activists in Santa Cruz, California, who want to use this eighth strategy as a pilot project for developing the Santa Cruz Climate Action Plan, for
That's
example.
great. That's
There's a real well-known uh, uh, Black social justice activist in Atlanta who's creating group of dialogue sessions around the ACE work in Atlanta. These are things that we didn't ask anybody to do. They're just starting to happen. And there are constant conversations now with education networks and research networks and activist networks. It's not uniform. The snowball hasn't rolled all the way down the hill yet, but there is momentum starting to occur, and it's really encouraging to see. And we're in the process of meeting twice a week now to keep talking about what's the next move to advance this, because I think everybody's sort of hell bent on not letting this die out. And this is why one of the ways of not letting it die out is to distribute this book to leaders in whatever networks we have, And also distribute the website, aceframework.us. Actually giving people a book is more impactful because it's a physical thing and it's there in front of them and they are likely to read it. And if they're a political person, they might read it, but they might drop it on the desk of an aide who will read it, right? And that's just as good because the point is to express the real genius of these people, of transformational insights of this group, really inspiring group of people.
Yeah, when I read your book, the simple book, um, I
My
mean,
old book from
it's
last
all
October.
underlined. It's all, I thought I'll just read it. It's all yellow. The whole book is yellow. But I think it's really important. This communication starts, the education starts. At some point, it's going to become part of the mainstream conversation, and that's when we can just say goodbye to all the deniers and everything else. Once it becomes mainstream, we're all talking about it, and it's part of our world. Then it's just going to take on its own life, which is important for us. So, anyone have any questions?
Can I make
Kurt.
one comment about what you just
Okay,
said?
sure.
Uh, so
I'm rushing through everything.
in the really old book from last October, the
Yeah.
simple book,
The
uh,
one I highlighted all over.
yeah, there's a chapter that talks about what helps people engage, and it's sort of advice from the communication community and the social science research and communication research community. And one of the things that it makes clear is that this effort to constantly convince the deniers is a fool's errand.
Mhm.
The real hardcore deniers are now a very small percentage of the population, under 10%, I think, or maybe 10%. That's a
Great.
small number. And and if we continue to spend our time worried about convincing them and thinking that we can't make progress unless we do convince them, we are giving them extraordinary power, and they are bolstered by ideological libertarians in the fossil fuel industry who create strategy for them and provide funding for them.
Mhm.
So there's a kind of an adage in marketing and social marketing, which is if you're in a situation where you've got a losing communication playing field, change the rules of the game. Move on to, in other words, move on to something else. And the best move here is to embolden and empower the people who are already concerned about climate change to start talking about it and taking more overt action, crossing, drawing a line in the sand for yourself and crossing it and then telling people what you did. Because the telling what you did is how we start to change social norms. And as you said, mainstream this issue um, so that none of us are really required to feel like we're carrying a burden anymore. In fact, we quickly discover that there are lots of people feel like they're carrying this burden, and when we just see how much work is going on, it's really, really inspiring.
Well, that's I want people to ask questions. I'm going to say one
Yeah.
more thing that in your book, and in the I guess ACE framework as well, it talks about the GDP of everybody who's working on climate solutions. Do you
Mhm.
have that in your brain,
I
top of
do.
your head?
Yeah, so the wearestillin.org, I think, is their website, and a this is a list of the, companies and churches and local governments and institutions, and state governments that have committed themselves to continue to go after meet the goals of the Paris Agreement when it became clear that the Trump administration was gonna back away from it and leave the Paris Agreement. Those commitments represent about 65% of the US population and about 65% of GDP in the
Uh,
United States.
we're not
That
alone by
that's
far.
No, we're not alone by far. And I live in California, which has the fifth largest economy in the entire world. Um, eclipsed by the United States, of course, but fifth in the entire world. And California has the most ambitious climate laws in the country. We're supposed to decarbonize our economy by before 2050.
Mhm.
And this has enormous influence. One of the ways you saw it was when President Trump tried to get the auto industry to abandon the CAFE standards. California has always had an exemption and have more strict CAFE standards, vehicle emission standards, than anybody else in the country. And a bunch of car companies got together and said, no, we're not going to change course. We're investing in the market that matters. Such a big market in California. We can't afford to do two different things,
Yeah.
and we're not going to abandon what's working. And now Joe Biden says he wants to convert the entire federal vehicle fleet to electric vehicles by 2035, which means massive buying power, which means the prices are going to drop. And that means there's going to be more charging infrastructure and more availability for the rest of us. So, um,
You've
so
already made me really positive.
yeah, things are moving. Things are moving.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Yes.
Tom, I live in Atascadero, which I don't know if you know is about 15 miles north of San Luis Obispo.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering if you can tell me, I'm thinking about maybe there's a way that I can get involved in what they're doing in San Luis Obispo. If there's some department that's spearheading that, or how could I find out more about what SLO is doing?
So my main connection to SLO is Heidi Harmon, the mayor,
Oh, okay.
who I met at a conference that was held at the university there. And there is a sustainability department and a sustainability office at the officer at the university at Cal Poly.
Mm.
And so I would reach out directly to Heidi Harmon, and you can use my name if you want to. And I think she won her reelection this year pretty handily. She won original election by slimmest of margins,
Mm.
and she also and she has proven to be popular. And they've been trying to manage COVID and their climate goals all at the same time, which has been really challenging. So I would get in touch with her, and I don't know the name of the sustainability officer at the university, but um, they're they're well connected to one another. And Heidi Harmon has a Instagram account where she posts an awful lot of stuff. Mighty Heidi,
What is it again?
Mighty Heidi,
How do you spell that?
Mighty, Mighty
Oh,
Heidi.
mighty. Okay.
Yeah.
I I um I have this idea. I don't know how it where it could go from this little idea that I have to widespread use. But I saw a program on how the monarch butterflies, the population is down by like 99% this year. That they come to Pismo Beach on
Mhm.
their migration route, and there's like a few hundred of them instead of thousands and thousands this year. And so I was thinking, okay, well, people can plant mulberry, or is it mulberry?
It's milkweed.
Milkweed, thanks.
Yeah, our yard is full of it.
Right, and I've planted. You can buy wildflower mixes of pollinating wildflowers, which I've done in my yard. But I was just thinking maybe there are a lot of ways that individuals can do things like that that can help the environment, can help um, animals in the face of climate change. That planting trees, um, there could be tree planting efforts in towns where they get together and they on a Sunday and they plant a bunch of trees, but they would need guidance, so they'd have to get that, but and then watering them afterwards, et cetera, care. But just some kind of pardon the expression, grassroots effort that individuals everywhere could, like a list of things that they could do in at their home, in their neighborhood, in their town. To it's not some things might help with climate change because the more trees that there are, the better that is for the climate, et cetera, and to help with mitigating the effects, like with the planting milkweed and stuff. So I
So
just have this nascent idea. I'm
you're
not.
you're not alone. I can tell you the sustainability officer in Chris Castro in Orlando wrote about a number of community efforts like that that became models for civic behavior in Orlando. And these
Mhm.
kinds of things are happening all over. There's a nonprofit in Los Angeles called Tree People, and their whole mission is to help groups of people who want to plant trees as community projects undertake it and do it successfully. There are on my website in the resources page, I was asked to write a guide for the Aquarium of the Pacific called A Citizen's Guide to Becoming Climate Resilient. And it's written for the Southern California ecosystem, environment, climate system, but it's not unlike yours, really. And so it recommends specific actions that households and businesses can take to reduce emissions and to be more comfortable in the face of a warming climate. Um, and so, that's free. You can download that off my website. So, and there are countless resources like this, and this is part of what the ACE strategy is about doing is helping connect
Mhm.
communities together who are doing this kind of work to start mainstreaming this kind of work.
Yeah. So people all over the country can know
Mhm.
what they could do and start their own, but be affiliated. So share resources nationwide.
Share resources, learn how to do things
Yeah.
exactly, feel like they're part of something bigger. It's
Mhm.
our collective impact that gives us power, it makes us feel emboldened, and that also does the most good. So, um, yeah, so individual action matters because it's how we start to connect with others and change norms. It's the connections between us and the collective impact that we achieve that is really what we're after here. Yeah.
And it's inspiring.
Mhm.
Yeah. Kathy, if you want to, are you,
I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
I can
Yes.
hear you.
Mhm.
Okay.
We
Thanks
can
for
hear
your presentation, Tom. That's very heartening. I'm curious as to your you've written this book about the solution is actually simple,
Mhm.
just eliminating fossil fuel use in our culture. But how does that mesh with the ACE uh, platform?
Yeah, so there's a chapter about ACE in the simple book, in fact, because we were we had not had any of the dialogues yet, but when I wrote that book, we were still doing the planning work. But the Action for Climate Empowerment effort is largely one way to think of it is that it's about uh, engaging with people to adopt a philosophy like the simple book puts forth, right? That action is within our grasp, that the actions we contribute are meaningful, that our collective impact is powerful, and that this is in fact how societies change. So in my mind, the ACE work is a remarkable opportunity to plant to align the work that all these amazing people are doing, energized and knowledgeable people are doing, to increase the collective impact. But it's exactly in line with understanding that this is an adaptive problem. That we don't need a universal master plan that some mysterious heavy hand can implement, that doesn't exist. It's up to us. And so the simple book sort of brings it home to us and changes our understanding so that we feel empowered to lead and to act and to understand that our actions actually matter and that our connections are really, really invaluable and inspiring. And the ACE book takes that and actually is a strategy to put that into action on a large scale.
when I first read what you said about simple being, oh, just stop using fossil fuels, I scoffed.
Of course.
It's like, right, and then, but seriously, I start realizing, of course, if we focus on one thing, and Kurt, I'd like you to weigh in from the interactive workshop we did on if we just stopped using fossil fuels. And I went, yeah, that's brilliant. Just focus in on the one thing that we can do that's going to really make the biggest difference. And so, yeah, as I think I'm going to misquote or misinterpret Thoreau, but simplify. but it's simplifying after you know all the facts. It's simplifying once you understand the problem. So anyway, please, anyone else? Kurt, are you there? Are you here?
I am.
Hi, Kurt. Remember we did that well, you remember, of course, in December, we did an interactive workshop on, you go ahead, but would just ending fossil fuels do it?
Well, I had taken
I'll
some
put you on the
training.
spot. Let me just put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I had taken some training from a group called Climate Interactive, which is
Mhm.
affiliated with MIT, and they've developed tools that look at the different climate solutions and how it's a tool that you can manipulate and see if you do different things, how they'll help with drawdown. And eliminating fossil fuels entails a lot of different actions. So, and responses. So, but one of the more powerful things in the tool to do is to enact a carbon tax.
Mhm.
And that has a pretty dramatic effect in terms of the model, in terms of starting to bring down emissions. So, it is, in a way, it is, I would agree with Tom that it is simple. We have to keep fossil fuels in the ground for the most part, as much as we can. So,
The one thing I would add to that, thanks, Kurt. I agree with you, and I'm familiar with Project Drawdown and with Climate Interactive, and they're looking for the mechanisms and the actions that give the most bang for the buck. The ACE work goes in a different direction in a particular way, and that is that carbon accounting alone is technocratic, and it's not a way that gets people in people's identities engaged in this work. When people become really engaged, innovation happens at rates that are impossible for us to predict. And most of the economic models and forecasting work that even things like Project Drawdown are based on are inherently more pessimistic than they need to be, because it's impossible in an economic model, to account for innovation. And so innovation isn't really present in most economic modeling. And so the capacity for things to change rapidly and suddenly is something that is very, very real, but tends to be under the radar as we think about forecasting in technocratic terms. Um, Human beings have an enormous capacity to do the things they want to do. So, during the lockdown in last March and April, when the whole world suddenly stayed home and economies suddenly shut down, and people were losing their jobs and their businesses and all of that, and feeling isolated, there were some remarkable displays of human connection that people found. There was the nightly cheering and applauding the health workers in New York during the real horrible time in New York. You might remember that at the shift change, when health workers would leave the hospitals, there'd be this citywide cheer, right? I saw a video in Italy of wine glasses being clinked, but something was tied to them. And you realize those wine glasses were tied to extremely long sticks. And it was people on balconies reaching across the narrow streets to the people on the other side of the street to clink their wine glasses together, to have the feeling of social interaction when they couldn't be together for real in another way. And this is just an example of how human beings will adapt to achieve the things we want to achieve. And we have never before really embraced the climate challenge as a way to achieve the society we've always wanted. A society with cleaner air, with cleaner water, with less crowded streets, with greater social capital and social interaction, with greater equity, less racial hostility and violence. this is what we're talking about, the opportunity to create, right? And if we focus on that, then our capacity for innovation in technology, in processes, in the way we do things together is can be surprising. And there's a model of social change in sociology work called the S curve. And it means that for years and years, people put work in and work in and work in, and you don't see any change. And then some catalyst happens, and boom, you see a sudden change of state, and then you're in a new state. And people say, where did that come from? Where did the legalization of gay marriage come from in the United States? It just came out of nowhere, right? Well, it didn't really come out of nowhere. It came out of decades and decades of hard work that suddenly culminated in a shift change that we didn't see coming. And I take heart in the notion that this actually happens, that people have been working on climate empowerment and engagement for decades, decades. And that work has been slowly achieving progress, but we tend to think that we're kind of in this steady, slow state. Who's to say it won't, that this isn't the year that things suddenly turn around and we're all on a different mission, on a different
Oh,
collective
I
course.
so agree with you with that. I've used that same, the gay marriage, how suddenly it just became fine. Nobody, oh, perfect. I don't care. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like, but it took years to get to that point, and then it just went zoom off, and it was surprising to people. And I think I'm hoping that's what'll happen with
And
climate
not without
conversation.
controversy and not without
Yeah,
throwbacks and backlash, but it has taken hold anyway. And that's what those of us in the ACE world are kind of working on for climate change now.
yeah, I love the ACE. Now, I urge everyone, is it aceframework.us?
aceframework.us, and if you want to support the book and buy
I'll
a
get
million
that for sure.
copies and send them to a million friends and family, it's Empowering Climate Action in the United States.
Yeah,
The series is called Resetting Our Future. You can find it through the resettingourfuture.com website, but you can also just find it on Amazon by typing in the title or typing in Tom Bowman, and both of the books will come up. So
yeah. I just didn't eat. It got it immediately. Anyone has any more questions? I want
I
to.
do.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Hello from Atascadero.
Yes. Tom, you had, I was kind of formulating a question to ask, and then you said something that is in the same lines, which is that you said the ACE framework, it seemed that it's advanced to the point where it can live on,
our hope. That's what we're working for.
hope is. So I was wondering, I don't know how, so I guess this is like a two-part thing. How much you are aware of the inner workings of the environmental and climate change efforts in the Biden administration or in the government. And then there's also all the things that all these other NGOs and agencies and organizations have been doing for years. But we have, the way I see it, we have 4 years to really nail down a lot of programs and really set things up so that even if the next time a Republican is elected, they can't dismantle everything. In other words, do you think that it's in 4 years' time, it can reach, both in the private sector and the public sector, it can reach the point where these efforts can't be undone? They're self-sustaining, or they're part of the fabric of government and or the law and
Right.
or the culture.
Well, here's the way I look at that. We're talking in 2 years, because in 2 years there's another congressional election.
Right. Yeah.
Congressional elections tend not to go well for the party that has the White House, but you never know. I mean, there's so much you never know in this world, right? This political moment. My main interest for a long time has been to change culture in a way that supports solving these problems so that it doesn't matter who's in power, because the marketplace is spoken. There's so many people engaged in a different way of working and seeing things and set of desires that that it doesn't really matter who's in, there is a stronger foundation that becomes bipartisan ultimately, or that ignores party, and this lives outside of the ping ponging of national elections. That's where I think the ACE work has so much power.
Mm.
And it's also why I wrote the book, The Simple Book. People have called me and called me to thank me for writing The Simple Book, because they're not used to reading a book that's realistic and optimistic about climate change. And there's a great hunger for that. So, and that book is about changing our interpretation so that we can establish social norms and a culture of empowerment to solve this problem. And the ACE work is exactly about that, by creating, supporting, and amplifying participatory decision making in communities where people are choosing the things that matter to them, that are highly salient to them, so that regardless of whether Biden can pass a climate bill, he wants to pass a $2 trillion climate bill and give 40% of that money investment to disadvantaged communities. That's an incredible thing.
Yeah.
If he can't get Congress to do it, and who knows, he's got a raft of executive orders that are making this part of the way government works, and he's doing it right away, which
Mhm.
means that it will become part of the daily activity structure in all 13 federal agencies
Mm.
by the time he leaves office. And once that happens, even if rules change, the agencies will slow walk those changes. They'll have a certain amount of horsepower built in. More importantly, I think, was that this is our chance to embed this in communities all across the country, and in professions, and in education programs, and in workforce training programs, and in the way we talk about the future, and the way we talk about rebuilding from the COVID and economic crisis, so that climate action and climate justice become assumed. And there's enough public support for this now I think that can actually happen now. It couldn't have happened 10 years ago, but it looks like it could really happen now. And and so the reason we're also excited to be working on the ACE work is that we see it. We can tell that this is a rare moment of opportunity to
Mhm.
advance this, not not on our own, but because it's about empowering the work that everyone else is doing. And when you work on that, when you stop thinking that you have to solve this crisis, and in fact, you're facilitating and celebrating the work that other people are doing, it's not only a huge relief. you know, it's like the Biden administration doesn't get to be the white savior, but you get the advantages. They don't have to be the white savior,
Yeah.
right? That's what this is all about. And can we do that in 4 years? Yeah, I think we can. Can we do it in 2 years? Boy, it depends on how deeply and aggressively and quickly we can empower the people who are in this work to feel committed toward common purpose. Um, and that's this is lobbying month in Washington. It's chaos there. Every NGO is sending letters. There have been letters sent by the World Wildlife Federation on our behalf and signed by 150 signatories, or something like that. Um, we don't know which things will have impact. We know that the Biden team is not talking to us because they don't know we exist yet.
Mm.
They're talking to a lot of other people, but we know that the State Department supports this. We know that NOAA supports this. We know that, and I'm talking about within the official channels for communication with the Paris Agreement, the UN structure. They can't do it officially, but they like the idea. So, stay tuned, really, and agitate and stay tuned. And you can individually endorse the framework if you want to at aceframework.us. Get more people to do it. You can sign up for the newsletter. We put a newsletter out. This is all volunteer, but the newsletter goes out about once a month that is about, and when there's an opportunity to sign on to something, that goes out. We're in the process of literally planning what are the next steps if we get a green light. How do we go get philanthropic money to do this, whether we get a green light or not. If we get a green light from government, we're still going to need private donor money to support some of the things that need to be done. So there's a lot of activity happening and a bunch of people working on it who don't want to say no. So
Well, you've got a huge amount of top names working on it. And from what we heard in December at Climate Tucson, at least one representative of NOAA really believes it'll get some traction.
he's right on the inside of government through the regular order process. And
Yeah.
he's also, Frank Niepold is a rare person. He is so connected. Everybody knows him and trusts him because he's been working with educators and other people and networks for so long that he has built rapport and relationships. And there are people in this group who have equally deep relations with climate justice networks and indigenous networks. And I have connections in the business world and the science community. A number of us have connections in the science community and the what's called informal education community, which is museums, aquariums, zoos, nature centers, that whole world. There are educators who have connections. There are people who are part of the Citizens Climate Lobby involved. And I'm just really talking about the coordinating team
Yeah.
that
Read the end of the back of the framework and just look at the people, the
it's
institutions, the organizations, the individuals working on this, and really impressive.
contributed to it. Yeah, it's this people from the city of New York and city of Orlando and other cities all around the country, including DC. It's education, it's universities all over the place. Just take a look at it. And that same list is in the back of the book. So the
Have you heard of
appendix.
Solar Citizens United?
No, I haven't heard of that group.
It's wonderful. They came to Tucson, or they came to Arizona, and in 3 cities, what they do is find people who are interested in putting solar on, but not sure they could afford it,
Mhm.
and finding the best quality installers who would bid to give discounted rates if you got a critical mass of people who wanted to put solar on their homes. And it works. It gets people past that hump of can I do it?
Wow.
And they engages nonprofits like ours to recruit people and let people know about this opportunity. They put it in the newspaper. They get involved with the nonprofits to help recruit their members to. But anyway, the problem is it brings the cost of solar down, but it doesn't make it affordable to those very low income communities. But it has inspired our city council and our board of supervisors to do something to begin to build solar, and people looking for grants that can allow them to put solar on in low income communities and help the utility to conserve energy and to be more efficient in the way they. Anyway, it's very complicated, but it's a wonderful organization. It's national, and they've been in a number of different states. Solar Citizens United.
Solar Citizens United. That's cool.
Well, that's an example of person to person to person and on up and gathering that many more people. It's a great example of it. And getting the city. I don't know. I think I mentioned to you, the city of Tucson has declared a climate emergency.
Good.
It's now official. We're going to be working on this.
That's important.
It's a statement.
Really important. So does the city have a climate action plan?
Well, they do, and they're looking for input. Did everyone get that questionnaire? That link to the questionnaire the city's looking for? They're looking for input now. This, our water, Tucson Water has got it's 2100. That's their water project, and looking at how to, continue to save water, and they're looking for citizen input. So right now, the water people and the city are looking for us to give them guidance.
And our mayor has declared a climate emergency.
Right.
That's great. Our mayor has signed the C40 agreement, the mayor's commitment. And I'm not sure if our city council has approved it. It might be in the public comment phase, but climate action plan's been developed for Long Beach. And they're happening all over the place. And this is the point, right? That
yes,
that it's happening below the level of national policy. And
Mhm.
now we have an administration that believes that that's important, that wants to promote local and state level action as part of it. Um, and we'll see how these executive orders, roll out, how they actually take shape. Um, but the great thing about what they've done is they've linked climate justice with climate action, with green job creation, with national security, and with public health. And they understand that they all are the same thing at the center. And so the rebuilding plan is based around grant making and rule making and policy investment, all toward these common goals, which is, holy cow, what a turnaround in 1 month
You
from
know,
where you were.
could you work any faster, Joe? You're not, you're dragging your feet.
Yeah, stop slowing down.
I know we're getting, it's actually, we're getting close, and Tom has been so kind to keep talking. Does anyone have another question?
How are we compiling all these efforts at the local community level and in neighborhood level, all the way up to the state and national level? There's a lot
Yeah,
of examples we talked about scattered around, but
there
are
are
we compiling that information?
there are organizations that do some of that. There's the wearestillin.org
Mhm.
group. There's another group funded by Bloomberg. It's called Accelerating America's Commitment, I think it's called. And they publish a report every year. Um, but We Are Still In is kind of the most obvious place to look, and they're changing their name. I think they're going to change their name to America is Still In or something like that, because or back something like that, because we're going back in, so they'll change their name. But in any case, that's one of the places to do it. But part of the ACE strategy is to create this kind of national compiling and the backbone infrastructure that helps organizations understand where they fit into this coherent strategy, and to help build mutual learning and mutual effort across the networks, and to share resources, and to provide, remove obstacles, provide the one of the big obstacles, for example, is most community groups don't have the wherewithal to compete for grants because they just don't have the capacity to do it. It's an onerous process, takes a lot of time. You have to know how, and most community-based groups just don't have the staff or the free time or the knowledge to do it. And so one of the pieces of the strategy is to recommend ways to streamline that process so that community groups can, in fact, get more funding, um, because the funding tends to go to the big organizations that have all the tools to get it, and that's really, I mean, it's helpful to a point, but it doesn't really empower the grassroots where people are. So there are lots and lots of features like that in here that the national strategy is designed to promote or to overcome obstacles. And the one you named is one of the ones that we need to do what's called a landscape map, or a stakeholder map, and really get a better picture of what networks and organizations exist that are doing what kinds of work and where and with whom, so that we can start building this kind of network of networks is the way they call
Mhm.
it. And academics like to call it not working, KNOT, not working. It's another term I've been learning. And I'm
A
starting
list
to
of lists.
list of lists, but also building the relationships across the nodes, so to speak, so that um, because it's in the relationships that the work progresses.
That's right. That's right.
It's not just in the fact that we have a list, it's in the relationships that fosters.
Well, this is just terrific. I have been so, last week, Chuck Schumer said that Biden's embedding of climate change has entered the Senate, that all Senate committees have that.
Bravo.
Yeah. So this is going to be a great year for the climate. And I'm so thrilled about the framework, trying to get us together, and just the knowledge that there's so many of us on the ground interested and working and believing. So I encourage everyone at least to go to the website, take a look at it, And I want to thank you so much, Tom.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I love meeting people who like you guys who are doing what you're doing.
Well, we're steady in it. We're steady, right?
Good.
And Tucson for, for I shouldn't say this, for being in Arizona.
Oh, I love Tucson. Tucson's one of my favorite places.
We're very progressive on our climate. I mean, I just quickly, one of the things that we do here, and it's climate related because buffalo grass, which is an invasive grass species, is wreaking havoc on causing fires that burn our saguaros. And there are huge numbers of Tucsonans out there pulling up buffalo grass in the desert. That's hard work. So
Wow.
we join with the rest of America and the world doing those bits that combine, make a beautiful tapestry of work on climate across the country.
Yeah.
And you're helping us, you're giving us an outline. So thank
That's great. That's great. Well, all climate work is local work. The impacts of climate
you.
are experienced locally and the solutions exist locally. So
Yeah.
bravo to you guys.
Yeah, we're happy we're in Tucson. So thank you. I don't know, can you stay on? I don't know if I can end the meeting. I want to ask you, Tom, a non-climate related questions. So I'm going to end the meetings. You guys can listen to my non-climate question and then I can just stop the meeting. But by any chance, do you know a Rich Pulsifer?
No, I don't.
Okay. He's passed. He was my cousin's husband. Does the same kind of work. He did displays in national parks.
Oh.
Yeah, but it was, he was out of Utah.
Uh-huh.
So I thought maybe it was a small world.
Yeah, and there are different niches even within that world. The national park groups, people who work on national parks tend to be different than the people who work in the corporate side or the museums.
I'm
But
sure.
it's very strange. As small as the world is, it can be even